Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I'm showing by my official timepiece that we have about a minute before the start of the hour. So we will be with you momentarily. We'll get started in just a moment. All right, it's showing 1 o'clock on my watch, so let's go ahead and kick things off today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Amber Colson, Event Marketing Manager with myNuspire. I know you're looking forward to today's content, so just a few quick logistical items before we begin. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, feel free to submit them using the chat panel or the questions panel on your screen. We'll address those at the end. Later on in our call, we'll also have a live demo of the threat modeling tool within myNuspire, so be sure to stick around for that. And lastly, you'll receive a recording of today's presentation via email within the next 48 hours. Okay, not sure what that was, but we will get that taken care of in a second. In the meantime, I would like to go ahead and introduce you to today's speakers. J.R. Cunningham, our CSO, Michael Wilson, our CIO and CTO, and Jerry Nguyen, Director of Threat Intelligence and Rapid Response. Gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Amber. And again, thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate your time. I'd like to talk with you a little bit today about beating the bad guys at their own game. What are the tools and techniques that we can utilize to do that? So we're going to spend some time on threat modeling. We're going to talk about who the bad guys are, how they operate, and perhaps most importantly, what we should do about it. And then at the end, we're going to show you some of the tools that we use within myNuspire and encourage you to use as well. So I'd like to start with what exactly is threat modeling. It's a term that's widely used. It like other terms in our industry, it is a term that can have different meanings. It's often used by product companies to talk about their specific products, but we really want to talk about these 4 key points around threat modeling. Threat modeling is simply the process that we use to identify industry-specific threats to an organization, meaning back to the who are the bad actors, who are the threats that are relevant to you. Not just the threats that show up in Security Magazine or the Wall Street Journal, but the relevant threats to you. It allows us to discover gaps in technology and processes in order to combat being vulnerable to those threats. If you think about the definition of risk, risk is really threat times vulnerability over countermeasures. And if we don't understand who the threats are, we're missing a critical component in having a conversation about risk. And so, part of allowing a company to discover gaps in defensive technology is understanding who the bad guys are and how they operate. This also enables us to prioritize defensive measures and better defend our most critical assets against attackers. I think one of the things that we've done in our industry that's been quite a disservice over the last couple of decades is we've kind of tried to spread peanut butter in the sense of we've tried to be average at a whole bunch of different controls. And the reality is most organizations can only be good at a few things and only be really, really good at an even shorter list of controls and defenses. And so understanding who the enemy is, how they operate, helps answer that question of how should we prioritize our spend, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And finally, threat modeling is important in reducing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which of course has been given the acronym FUD in our industry, while still staying on top of what the bad guys are doing. Back in the early 2010s, we had a massive amount of large retail breaches. And what happened as a result of that is a lot of us, the security practitioners, we really scared the executives and and our boards of directors by saying things like, if you don't invest in the cybersecurity program, the bad guys are going to get us, right? And what happened was, over time, executives and boards recoiled from that fear and said, you know what, I'm not going to accept that anymore. I need real data on whether or not my security program is actually protecting me. And so I think what happened was, in an effort to not generate fear, uncertainty, and doubt, we actually stopped talking about what the bad guys were doing. There was actually a quiet period in our industry where, if you look back through industry publications, trade publications, we got really focused on the defenses, the controls. We got really focused on the frameworks and compliance, and we kind of steered away from talking about who the enemy is and how they operate. And I think that was due in part by the fact that we were being driven by boards and executives to not use fear, uncertainty, and doubt as a way to drive funding for our cybersecurity programs. And so threat modeling really is a way for us to have a rational conversation about who the enemy is and how they operate, without being fear mongers and without trying to scare the next dollar out of the budget, if you will. So how does threat modeling help? As I mentioned, we're really after answering three questions. Who are the bad guys? How do they operate? And what do I need to do about it? And each industry has its own very unique set of bad actors. If you look at the motivation of certain threat actors, sometimes they're financially oriented, sometimes it's about theft of intellectual property, and sometimes it's just about breaking stuff and destroying things. So understanding who the threat actors are relevant to you is really critical in picking apart how do they operate. And then finally, the most important piece, what do I need to do about it? How do I, as we mentioned earlier, how do I prioritize those defenses? One of the interesting things about threat modeling is, this seems like a drastic oversimplification. Number one, who are the bad guys? But if you think about it, if you start to pick apart different industries, look at healthcare, for instance. We know that ransomware is far and away the number one threat. We also kind of know who the bad actors are that execute a lot of these ransomware attacks. And so by picking that apart, if I'm in the healthcare setting and I'm thinking about those bad actors and prioritizing my defenses, the what should I do about it, I'm more likely to thwart the attack activity that is relevant to me and my industry, as opposed to trying to throw darts at the dartboard of controls and defenses. So let's talk a little bit about who the bad guys are. The first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what makes our industry unique to a threat actor? I mentioned healthcare earlier. Healthcare has some very interesting paradigms in health IT that are different from other industries. Things like biomedical device networks, an extreme focus on patient privacy and data protection. Retail has a different set of circumstances where security of the point of sale systems, credit card security, and loyalty program privacy are key. Whereas in the manufacturing space, generally speaking, it's all about availability, making sure the conveyor belts are still running, making sure the distribution channels still work, all of that stuff. So understanding what makes your industry unique to a threat actor is kind of that first step in picking apart who are the bad guys that you really care about. If you go online and you start searching for different threat actors and the different ransomware variants and where they come from, you start to get an idea of who those threat actors are that are particularly relevant to your industry. We've seen recently critical infrastructure attacks, right? And there's a very particular set of bad guys that are interested in that type of infrastructure. So conducting threat models that take into account, why are you interesting to the enemy? What would they care about? Where's their home? Where are they based out of? The top threats against the manufacturing sector this year have primarily originated from 3 nation states. So as an example, understanding where they're from can also help inform what we're going to do about it with our defensive posture later on. And finally, how do they think? What are they interested in? What motivates them? As we've seen in healthcare, the bad guys are really keenly interested in using ransomware to extort money out of, out of the victim organization. And of course, that's the general MO of ransomware anyway. But if you look at some of the other compromises that are out there, deep intrusions into aerospace manufacturing designed to steal intellectual property and designs of critical defense, information. Understanding how the enemy thinks is really key to, that kind of step one, right? Who are the bad guys, and then finally, how do they operate? So, want to bring Jerry into the conversation here with how do they operate. This is something that MITRE with the attack framework and the pre-attack framework has done a really good job of structuring a way to inform how the bad guys operate, specifically, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, we call them. And I know most of you on this call probably have heard of the MITRE attack framework and know what it is, but Jerry, if we could just get your perspective on, this thing has really been widely adopted by pretty much every industry. It's a pretty common way of dissecting how the enemy operates. Could you just share your perspective on what you see in the field, as the leader of our threat practice, and talk to us a little bit about why is this tool an important tool in dissecting how the bad guys operate?
Sure thing, and that's a great question of where did the MITRE attack framework come from? So let's start there. Right. So like JR had mentioned earlier on in the early 2010s, when the cyber attacks really started gaining traction or became more publicly known, a lot of practitioners in the field started cataloging a lot of the techniques that the bad guys were using. And the research facility that MITRE is, they started gathering all this information. They started building out a framework. What steps does it would an attacker go through to basically compromise your environment? So they cataloged everything out. They started, they put it underneath the life cycle, and they put techniques under each stage of the life cycle. Like, what would an attacker do when they're in the reconnaissance phase? What would they do when they're compromising a system? What are they going to do when they try to move laterally, across an environment? And they also started to catalog it to verticals as well, by which threat groups use certain techniques in a certain industry vertical. And as a practitioner, when we take a look at the MITRE attack framework holistically, especially for me, when we're doing investigations, when we identify a certain threat group, or we don't know what the threat group is, but we know, obviously we know the industry vertical that our customers in, we can start kind of already getting a head start on the investigation, responding faster, if you will, just knowing that, for example, on this slide here, in the healthcare, APT 29 targets healthcare. Here are the techniques they use, and then at the end of the investigation, what recommendations we would make, to improve your defense posture against a group like APT 29 if you're in the healthcare industry. This framework has been adopted by many organizations, like JR had mentioned, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I always lean back towards the MITRE attack framework when I'm talking about threats. It's a recognized framework. It's from a trusted, reliable, neutral source where everybody has, for the most part, has agreed that this is the framework we should use. These are the techniques we've seen in the wild. And that's why we use the MITRE attack framework and why we reference it so much. A lot of work has been put into creating this framework, not from just one source, but from a lot of practitioners in the field that have seen these attacks firsthand.
Jerry, one of the concepts that we as practitioners often embrace is this idea of stopping an attack as early in the quote kill chain as possible, right? If we can prevent an attack from happening in the first place, great. But then once an attack is successful, if we can stop that attack before detonation or lateral movement occurs, great. And then, of course, as we move further into the kill chain, we see that the cost to mitigate and the potential damage, increases. and the odds of avoiding a bad outcome decreases. Uh, how have you seen companies using the MITRE ATT&CK framework to, you mentioned moving faster and being able to respond quicker. How have you seen organizations use MITRE in order to move the bad guy activity further or earlier into the kill chain before being able to successfully, detect and defeat that adversarial activity?
And that's a great question, JR. It's a concept that many of us refer to as security to the left. Right, we want to move to the left of the life cycle as much as we can.
Mhm.
Even before an attack happens, if we take a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, when I was an internal security engineer, when we were setting up our defense postures in the early days, we kind of didn't know what we were doing, right? And let's be honest, in 1999, 2000, 2001, do you have a firewall? Yes or no? And that was the extent of what we were doing, right? For the most part. Yeah, everyone can smile. We all related to this at one point or another in our careers. But now as attackers are getting more sophisticated, and just because you have a firewall doesn't mean you're protected. You have to configure that firewall. You have to make sure you have certain rules in place, and then we get down to the host level where we have to make sure we have EDR in place. We have to make sure that the EDR platform is configured correctly. Well, how do we know what to configure that with? Right? Do we do what we would have defaulted to, say back in 2002, where we deny everything and we stop the business from running? As a security practitioner, our job
Right.
is done, right? Awesome. That was a great that was a great way of securing things, but we have to understand what the business needs now. So having something that helps you plan out, not boiling the ocean of cybersecurity prevention, detections, alerting. Now with a framework like MITRE, we can see exactly in our vertical. Let's continue down with healthcare. Which groups are going to attack healthcare? What techniques are they likely going to use? So let's take that information and let's apply that to our defense posture or our cybersecurity tool stack versus not configuring it or versus firewall, yes or no. We take a step beyond that. That's how we prepare and move security to the left.
Jerry, one more question for you. You've done hundreds and hundreds of these for many different industries. Are there any bad guy techniques, the how do they operate, that have really leapt out at you that made you go, uh-oh, this is something that we weren't prepared for, or a particular industry wasn't really ready to deal with, and caused a recommendation to occur that they probably would not have realized otherwise?
Oh, that's a loaded question, JR. I mean, I could go back a long ways to that, and let's I'll answer two ways. One, a simple one, and then a more complex one. Back in 2006, 7-ish, I responded to an organization. They had a website up that allowed people to upload pictures to. Right, one of the so everybody's uploading pictures or whatnot, and then suddenly they were notified that their website had been hacked. They called us in to do an investigation. We took a look at the files, we looked at the upload location, and suddenly we saw there was a file in there called God CFM. CFM is a cold fusion extension, old 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 web dev type of extension. And what god.cfm did was basically it allowed root access to the web server. So we're like, well, how did that happen? And it turned out that the website itself didn't validate any files that it was receiving via that upload page. All right, so bad guy just went and uploaded. So that was incredibly effective way uh for the attacker. Simple fix for the customer that they just didn't think about input validation. So that's an example of a fairly simple one. A more complex one that required changes to an endpoint the detection platform was in 2008 8, 9 maybe, responded to a defense industrial base type of organization, where we're trying to figure out how the attacker was moving around the environment, how their command and control was working. Right. So now we're in the command and control. So clearly the attack's all the way to the right now. Things are costing a lot of money. Multiple consulting organizations here trying to figure it out. And one of our malware analysts and forensics engineer, as he was investigating one of the hosts, he stumbled across this registry key that didn't make sense. All right. So, and one of the pieces of malware was calling this registry key. And a registry key is a configuration item inside of Windows at a high level for those that haven't experienced working with the registry before in Windows. So our forensics/malware engineer found that whenever this piece of malware ran, it would call that registry key, and that registry key had an encoded blob of text, if you will, and that was what got translated and called out to the command and control server. All right, so now we fast forward to present day. The MITRE ATT&CK framework has that technique cataloged, during command and control. It talks about that. So for example, if APT29 uses that technique, now as somebody that's preparing a defense posture, now I know that, hey, I got to make sure that my EDR can detect either changes to the registry or registry keys being called by a piece of malware and has a connection out to the internet. Things like that is where we move security more to the left.
Yeah, that's great. And kudos to all of the security practitioners and researchers over the years that have fed, the MITRE ATT&CK framework with, these TTPs, right, to help inform, who the bad guys are and how they operate. But when we get to what do I need to do about it, the world of cybersecurity, if you think about it, consists of, let's call it 200 or so things that we can do: controls, defenses. And, the question, as I mentioned earlier, becomes which half a dozen or dozen should I be really effective at? And threat modeling is a key part of this picture. Understanding who the enemy is, how they operate, helps inform which components of my security program need to be really good. I'll give you an example. I was talking about healthcare earlier. Well, we know that if we do 3 things really well in healthcare, we take ransomware risk down significantly. Those 3 things are network segmentation, multi-factor authentication, and privileged access management. If I do those 3 things in a healthcare setting, I get those biomedical devices segmented off of the billing networks and all the traditional IT stuff, get them away from the email servers, leverage multi-factor authentication and good privileged access management. I know that materially reduces my risk to ransomware. Does it take that risk to 0? No, of course not. Are those things hard and expensive to do? Yes, they are, especially in a healthcare setting. But understanding how the enemy operates, who they are, how they operate, can help me prioritize that short list of defenses, and also, frankly, help me avoid pitfalls, which we'll talk about a little bit later in an upcoming series here. But avoiding project failure and getting those quick hits for maximum risk reduction given the threats. The other thing that's important here is security is not static, and we need to be able to turn knobs and dials in the security program in order to stay on top of the enemy. And threat modeling is the tool that allows us to do that. It really is the linchpin of putting together the connection between who the bad guys are, how they operate, and then finally what I do about it. The other thing that's important about threat modeling is it helps us ask that question: where do I have gaps? And that really drives future initiatives. What projects should I embark upon? Where should I ask for money? Where do I have capability that maybe I'm not using that I didn't need before, but now maybe I do because the threat landscape has changed. So with that, what I'd like to do is help share with you the story about how we at NuSpire are taking something that can be really complex, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and making it consumable, making it something that we can act upon. And so with that, I'd like to hand the controls over to Michael Wilson, our CTO and CIO, and have him walk us through our threat modeling tool that's found within the myNuspire platform, and give you a peek at how we think there's a better way to do this than the traditional make a big Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of boxes in it and color things red, yellow, and green. We think we've come up with a pretty cool and innovative way to do this, and so we'd like to show you what that is. So, Michael, over to you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and take control and switch sharing to the demo. So let me just confirm that everyone can see my screen. Awesome.
Yep, we got you.
So just like JR said, one of the most challenging pieces of a threat model and delivering that to a customer is the what do I need to do about this? We've talked about MITRE at length, and honestly, it is incredibly complex. Everything that goes into MITRE and understanding the TTPs and what defenses you have to put in place to protect against those different TTPs or techniques, it's very complex. So what we were really challenged to do is say, how do we make this threat model, how the attacker sees our customers, and make it something that's digestible, something they can get immediate recommendations to improve based on that. And what we came up with was the NuSpire threat modeling tool. Just as a high level to remind you, this is the perspective of the attacker. It's based on MITRE once again, and we build this entire threat model primarily based on the industry. So what I'm showing here is myNuspire. It is NuSpire's new platform that we just released as of Monday. So anyone can go and log in at this point in time. But the threat modeling tool is almost entirely based on your industry to start out with. And after we know your industry, we take our many years of experience working in threat intelligence and building these models manually. And we've finally been able to take all of those manual exercises and turn it into something that's automated, something that we can deliver on a reoccurring basis that's easy to update. And that's how this tool really came to be. And it's focused on what do I do about it? So before I go over how we come up and calculate the recommendations and make the threat model actionable, I want to go and I'm going to pass it back to Jerry so that he can talk to the data that actually powers it. So the data below that supports the recommendations, this is your who and the how. And after Jerry explains the technical details behind the who is attacking you and how they're attacking you, I'll go into how we go about calculating what are the next steps for you to take to defend against these. So Jerry.
Thank you, Michael. And the little history before I get started. I love going down memory lane because seeing this in this platform, it's lots of years and years of work for us threat intel folks to be able to get to this point. Like JR mentioned, when we did threat modeling not too long ago, it was a spreadsheet. The entire MITRE attack framework, you have to zoom in 300% to actually see something. Things like that were what But as a threat intel researcher and engineer, that's what we lived off of. That's what we loved about it. But the most as we were doing these threat models, lots of customers asked, Jerry, this is great for my threat intel team, but as a CISO, what do I know about this? What do I do? Right. So we definitely still want to highlight the who and the how, because that's still important to understand the recommendation we want to make versus boiling the ocean. So we have that information displayed here. For example, if we take a look at Magic Hound, right, that's a critical group. They're known to attack the information technology sector. We have some details of how they're doing it. And if we wanted to take a deeper look, we could click on the link, head straight over to the source of this data. And that's MITRE. And MITRE has all these has all this information broken down, has the techniques being used. Again, as a security engineer, this is where we make the configurations to detect things such as command and scripting interpreter, the Windows command shell. What does that look like? you know, when the bad guys are prepping their data to steal the data and transfer it outbound, how do they do it? And then, if, like Michael just clicked on to another link here where we're deep diving the, Mike, if you can go back to that page real quick. Yeah,
Yep.
we're now deep diving this technique. Again, we go back to the source. MITRE has done a lot of, great cataloging work from all the sources out there, that are doing these investigations and publishing, the techniques. And here's the important part: is the mitigations, right? So notice how we had to go through 3 steps to get down to mitigations, right? So if we go back to myNuspire now, we covered the techniques, we covered the who and the how, and then the known threat group locations. JR touched on this briefly earlier on, the importance of knowing where your threat groups are located at. From an investigative standpoint, I always want to know this information. One, because everybody has working hours. So, for example, if I'm here in Washington State and I have a device, that for some strange reason is having, attacks attempts at it 12 hours ahead of me, I would want to know which region that's in to see if that's a working hours location for whoever that may be that's trying to attack me. So that's why I always want to know where the known threat group locations are at. And these panels down here is, it's for the security engineers, and it's for the folks that just want to know a little bit more. But all of this information feeds recommendations up top. Like I said earlier, we had to go through 3 pages before we got to mitigations. Here in the platform, we've done it for you. So I'll stop here. I'll let Michael show the top portions of the recommendations, the scoring, and all that good stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry, for going into the details for us. So kind of in closing this out, that what Jerry just covered was the data, the years, honestly, of work that we've spent collecting this data together, adding what we contextually see from our experience, and put it all into a tool, something that is consumable with a nice data model behind it. So let's talk about how we come up with these recommendations. At first glance, what you can do with a threat model is say, these are now the ways that these different attack groups attack me. But we wanted to take it one step further, not just offering our customers, these are the things, these are the techniques you need to protect against, but we wanted to be able to track in real time with our customers, what is your defensive state? So that we can better focus on the defenses that they need that they don't currently have. Basically, what is the delta of what they need to protect against threats in their industry that they don't have? We can help them understand where they are today, where they need to be, and what to focus on in the middle. And that's really the power of our recommendations. So as an example, as a new user into myNuspire, what you would get is just a default set of recommendations based on your threat model. What are the biggest, most common techniques, as you can see in this chart down here? And then what are the controls that you need in place to protect against the most critical techniques? Very simple. But where the real magic of this tool comes in is combining where you are at today with how you're being attacked. And that's what we're showing here. In this example, for this customer, they are in the information technology industry, and that's where these recommendations and the threat models coming from. But you'll see our recommendations here are based on where the customer is at with their control. So as an example, everyone knows EDR is insanely important to protect against ransomware and all kinds of sophisticated attacks. And frankly, this is one of our most common recommendations that we make. But let's say, as an example, that you are already at a maturity level of 5, then we would show you the next most critical recommendation. And all of this is based on combining the threat model with where you are at today in your defenses. The analogy I like to give, and I feel like we've beat this horse pretty dead, but the analogy I really like to use is, if we know that our enemies are using battering rams, we probably don't want to make the walls of our castle any higher. We probably want to fortify the doors with iron to protect against the battering rams, because we know that's a technique that the enemy is going to use. And if we know from what we know about you that you do not have well protected and fortified doors, well, then we can recommend that you need to beef those doors up pretty significantly. On the other hand, if you already have ironclad doors, then maybe we should focus on something else. And that's really the power of this. So this is TMT. Once again, the threat modeling tool. It is open to the public. You can come in here now, set your industry, fill out your security program, download a copy of this report, give us feedback through the in website chat here. And the last thing I'll show, and just to take you over to it, is the security program, which is the defenses of your organization. We do have a webinar coming up that is going to go over this myNuspire security program in depth, but it is important to understand that this is half of the challenge in making the threat model actionable, is understanding where you're at today. And that's why it's a big part of what you need to do in order to get the most out of a threat model, is just know where you are today. And that's what the myNuspire security program is all about. And I'll just show very quickly, we are just mapping each of your individual controls to maturity levels. And you'll see we also have recommendations that are, forwards and backwards integrated with the threat modeling tool. We also have those recommendations go backwards into the security program. So you can figure out what you need to do next, no matter what your perspective is, whether you're trying to protect against threats or whether you're just trying to beef up your defenses. And with that, I'll pass it back to JR.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for the demo. Real quick on why we did this. As you can imagine, as a managed security services provider, we have an obligation to protect our customers first and foremost. We found that we were consistently being asked by our customers questions about, what should I do next? What are the threats that are relevant to me? What's important for my security program? And so really the driver behind all of this is our customers, first of all, having an expectation that we will do everything we can to protect them and their data. And then realizing, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this, for the entire industry. And that really what has driven a lot of this innovation, that the team has put together over time. How can we help? So as Michael mentioned, you can sign up for a myNuspire account. You don't have to be an existing customer of ours. And you can use that as a way to kind of step through some of the techniques that we talked about. We'd love your feedback. As Michael mentioned, there's a chat window. You can drop us feedback directly. One of the areas that we didn't go into great depth on is the what should I do about it question. And the reason for that is that's an entire webinar all on its own. We're going to do that tomorrow. So I would love for you to join me tomorrow. We're going to talk through, we're not going to demo any technology tomorrow. We're going to talk through really answering one fundamental question. If I've got $1 to spend on cyber, where should I spend it? It's a perplexing question. It's something that I have struggled with for 25 years. And, I don't promise you any silver bullets to that answer. Just like when we do threat modeling, we don't account for 100% of the enemy or how they operate. But the idea is, how do we continuously improve as practitioners and in our industry and get better over time? That's the goal. So if you would sign up for a myNuspire account, take a look at what we put together. Would love for you to join me tomorrow for that one perplexing question. I've got $1 to spend. Where should I spend it? And with that, I think we will open it up for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. So on the screen, we do have a little bit more details about the webinar that JR was just talking about. And we do hope that you will join us for that. More details, including the sign up link, are on our website, myNuspire.com. And while you are thinking of your questions, I will also put just a few more details up on the screen about how to get started with myNuspire. If you visit myNuspire.com/myNuspire, you'll see the information there on how to sign up, complete your basic profile information, and then get that threat intelligence information within hours. So there is one question that has come in, gentlemen. In some of the advertising and things for this webinar, we talked about the fact that you're getting that threat intelligence information within hours instead of weeks. Can you talk a little bit more about what that really means?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So what we used to do, putting these reports and threat models together manually, is every new request that would come in, we'd try to understand what's their industry. And we would go through this entire process of, just like we showed in the technical demo of those super detailed pages of MITRE and each TTP, and we would do that at any point in time. What we have built now is essentially a modern web application that tracks these things in a database so that we can reuse our intelligence across the different verticals. And after we've done enough of these threat models for each different vertical, we start to build this pretty extensive database that allows us to offer those to all, not just one industry, but all industries dynamically. And instead of just doing one at a time and deep diving into the industry, now our teams are focused on just keeping these models and the data behind the tool up to date in small chunks, rather than repeating these massive efforts one at a time. And because we are taking a different approach, we're able to give a always up to date view of a threat model instead of something that's only valuable at that point in time. So if a customer wanted to come check back in a quarter and see how their threat model changed, they can now do that, and we will have updated it on the back end with new information that we see and evolving threats, and that's how we're able to keep it up to date for the customers dynamically.
And Michael, I would just add to that if you think about how security leaders spend money. We tend to budget on 3 or 5 year cycles. We tend to buy, 3-year enterprise license agreements for some of our basic defenses, things like vulnerability management, network security, endpoint security, EDR, that kind of stuff. But the bad guy space is changing constantly. And so really what allows us to have a nimble and dynamic security program is keeping that threat model up to date. That tells us when we need to pivot. Otherwise, if we don't have that threat information, it gets really easy to say, hey, I've got a 3-year, ELA for my firewalls, and so I'm good. I don't need to do anything different. Whereas if we have a current understanding of who the enemy is, how they operate, I can start to use that to turn those little knobs and dials in my security program, which again we'll talk about more tomorrow. But that's really where our nimbleness and our adaptability come from, is understanding what the bad guys are doing.
Excellent. Another question that's come in: how do you evaluate adding new verticals to focus on, or how do you figure out what new verticals would be added to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started off with 15. Am I right, Michael? Keep me honest here. I think about 14 or 15 industry verticals that are they represent the overwhelming majority of the economy in North America. So we started there, obviously, as a way to capture as many verticals as we can, with as few categories as possible. So you can imagine what those are, right? It's, information technology, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, government, defense, industrial base, kind of the big buckets. What we've learned through this exercise is that if we know just that one piece of information, actually 2 pieces of information, what industry are you in and how big are you? If we know those 2 things, we can do some back of the napkin calculation of, this is kind of what normal looks like for your industry, and these are who the bad people are that would want to attack you and how they would operate. I gave the healthcare example earlier. A 12-bed hospital in a rural county is going to have a vastly different security program than a multi-state regional hospital system that has lots of information technology assets, et cetera. So that's an example of, within one industry, a few more pieces of information. Michael mentioned it earlier. The more we know about you, the more precise we can be. If we've got an idea of how big or small you are in the industry you're in, we can make some pretty informed recommendations around what's likely to work or not work for you for two reasons. One, we're doing threat modeling, so we know how the bad guys are operating. Two, we know what's likely to succeed or fail from a security program perspective, given the industry and the size. I was using the healthcare example several times throughout the day. Let me extend that a little bit further. We know that network access control projects are highly failure prone in the healthcare setting. They're very expensive, but they're also very effective if implemented successfully. So that would be an example of a recommendation where we see average maturity in healthcare being relatively low, but the risk, impact of implementing that technology is actually very high. And so that now we're having a kind of a decision about risk management and cost versus benefit and all of that. So the question's a great one. How do we decide new verticals? I think our focus really is about how do we become more precise in the 15 verticals that we're in and make recommendations that really matter to our clients. And so I think what you're going to see from us is more of a focus on precision. Retail and hospitality is a great example. The retail industry has some very interesting requirements with regards to PCI and credit card security. But what's happened in the last year, the retail sector has gone curbside, mobile app, cloud, loyalty program with, you get free this or that on your birthday. And so there are privacy concerns in the retail setting that didn't exist, 5 or 10 years ago. So the more we know about you, the more we can kind of refine those recommendations around, who the bad guys are, how they operate, and what you should do about it. That's a great question.
All right, one final question to wrap it up today. I normally never will talk about price on a webinar. It's just not a thing that we marketers do. But I have somebody saying, hey, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in logging into myNuspire and checking out the threat modeling tool. Can you just clarify for folks, do they have to throw down a credit card? Do they have to fill out a purchase order to get into myNuspire and get to this information?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we want to revolutionize the industry. We want to do something different and better. What we have been doing in the last 20 years, frankly, didn't work. It failed. The breaches are more costly, they're more damaging, they're more destructive. This isn't, we're not fighting enemies that are, young kids in mom and dad's basement eating a pizza, slugging a Mountain Dew, and trying to, destroy the website, right? These are very serious, nation state actors and whatnot. So we actually are approaching this from the perspective of you don't have to be a NuSpire customer. Obviously, we're using this for our customers. We think there's so much value in this that we'd love for you to go sign up, have an account, give us some feedback. At some point, obviously, we're going to want to monetize this in some meaningful way. And we're having discussions internally around what that looks like. But right now, we really want the feedback. We want your perspective as practitioners. We want the industry to tell us where to take this thing next. And so do you have to whip out the credit card right now? Only if you want to buy us lunch. Other than that, please sign up, take a look. And again, we would love your feedback. That's really what we're after, is bringing something to the market that is truly revolutionary and different. Excellent.
All right, well, with that, I think we are at the end of our presentation today. A couple of action items for folks who've watched our session. Be sure to go to our website, sign up for tomorrow's presentation on our security program. You'll hear more of JR tomorrow. Be sure to visit nuspire.com/myNuspire, get signed up there. You can check out the threat modeling tool, plus the first 100 folks that completely fill out that profile have a chance to win some cool, fun prizes from us. And then if you have any outstanding questions, please send them to webinars@nuspire.com. We'll process those and get back to you right away. With that, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.